My name is Dermot Bucknall, driver number 788898. I play music and I have a perspective convergence addiction. Alchemy occurs on this stretch of the East Yorkshire coastline. Land becomes sea as our memories slowly sink deeper. Reality is eroded. The Holderness coastline suffered the highest rate of coastal erosion in Europe. The physical landscape gradually steals away to the other side. What was once solid is now liquid. The landmarks, buildings, hedgerows and headlands that have triggered our memory these past years are crumbling away here. Recollections recede into the sea with no solid form left to conjure our thoughts. This landscape is in flux. Our memories are muddy waters, waves and tides and longshore drift. This fragile coastline gradually moves further and further westward. Impressions disappear, measured in metre lengths. We are caught in a slow-moving present. Though hardly in the fast lane, those of us who spend our lives here live fully on the edge.
It's a wild, wild city, it's a wild, wild town. I'm gonna buy a budgie if the pace slows down.
I returned to these parts some years ago, driven by a strange desire for a sense of visual purity. I had been a bus driver in Merseyside, but managed to escape its urban sprawl and its bus crew rivalry for the hazy blue horizons of Holderness and the joys of the 130 route. I traded the urban vertical for the rural horizontal. Something in my training had drawn me here. Bauhaus-trained operators like myself have long yearned for these conditions. Across these flat lands, I began to imagine my destiny. I spent my childhood holidays in this area, visiting my grandparents. My grandfather, Billy Blake, was a Withensea surrealist who painted this landscape all of his life, whilst ironically earning a crust as a checker, or what a layman might call an inspector, for the local bus company. It's in the blood, I suppose. He maintained a downtrodden persona despite gaining a minor following for his paintings in the mid-1940s. It was known as Inspector Canute, the checker who stopped the tide. No avalanche of traffic or flood of acceleration or timetable changes on his watch. The buses ran to time. For him, the running board ruled. I still have the most vivid memories of entering this territory in a vehicle as a child. That intense feeling of time slowing down and the distinct change of atmosphere. Regardless of the speed the vehicle was actually travelling at, whatever the speedometer was indicating, time slowed down as you entered this region. The area still exists in this time warp, emanating a sense of loss and foreboding, whilst locked into a strange, perpetual present. Oddly enough, the local bus company, the East Yorkshire Motor Service, seems to have recognised this condition. The speedometer on my bus has been changed from miles per hour to metres per year. Time slows down. But bus drivers know how to make time, and they also know how to lose it. In my formative years, I became captivated by the music of Jim Eldon. Jim made a living busking the pleasure boats out of Bridlington and was affectionately known as the Brid Fiddler. He was a hugely charismatic ballad singer and raconteur who sang and played his fiddle to the East Coast holidaymakers. As the Yorkshire Belle was finishing its trip, and just before it re-entered Bridlington Harbour, Jim would leap across to the Flamborian which had just set sail and was now beyond the harbour wall. Jim would jump, fiddle in one hand, bow in the other, from one boat to the next, before striking up again, his own version of Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark.
Hey baby, the laughs on me, stuck in Maggie's England. They'll be carving you up all right. They say you've got to stay hungry. Well, I'm just about starving tonight, working for the grocer's daughter. I just can't feel proud of myself. We came like lambs to the slaughter. Now we're just stock upon a shelf. You won't start a fire.
I bought all of Jim's early stick record output. Later, when I became lead singer in the band Rooney, I introduced the band's guitarist, Paul, to Jim's music. Eldon's East Coast ballads, accounts of everyday life, and his use of the vernacular became a major influence on Paul's songwriting. Songs such as Hometown and I've Got Guns from Eldon's Loaded Dice tape are now the accepted forerunners for much of the early Rooney material.
I'm not the little fugitive you used to shelter once. I've been out in the battlefield and I've got guns. I've got guns. I've got guns. I've got guns.
I was trained as a bus driver in the early 90s, in a bus garage housed in an extensive building, part of which had formerly been used as an art school. Some of the lecturing staff simply stayed on after the building was refitted and got subsumed within the garage, almost unknown to the passenger transport executive concerned. With them, they brought a curriculum that soon became a strange amalgamation of the two worlds. We learnt as much about arcane mathematical solutions to complex perspective problems as we did about semi-automatic gearboxes. Perhaps these were dressed up in practical notions of distance judgment and safety, but even now I find it hard to unravel the real reasons behind such a daring and obscure pedagogical experiment. It was around this time that I met Paul and Kim through my mate Jack Kettlewell. Jack and I had grown up together and become great friends due to our similar musical interests. By the time that he introduced me to Paul and Kim, Jack was studying fine art at Staffordshire University. Strangely, my bus driver training bore a closer resemblance to what Jack imagined he would be studying at art school than the course that he'd enrolled on. The dark arts of perspective, almost shunned in the contemporary art school, were re-established, not in the higher echelons of visual culture, but in the seeds that could be planted in those artists, mainly unknown to themselves as such, who would ride the orthogonals of reality, within the bus, the lorry, the car or the train. Jack later dropped out of art school and became a bus driver like me. I remember that after taking over the vocal duties in Rooney from Molly Dresser, Paul patiently coached me in that West Coast twang that a singer in the band would require. I recall my initial difficulty in trying to disguise the East Coast inflection that I'd developed during my misspent youth on the pleasure boats at Brid, hero worshipping Jim Eldon. Later, I easily fell back into this way of speaking, following my return to Holderness.
Couldn't hang around there to help and count the dead. I had to get to Jackson's to buy a loaf of bread. You can't drag your heels when you've got a load to fetch, or by the time you get there there'll be only all this left. Hometown.
After a few years, most of the lecturing staff from the original art college became parking drivers. Their acute awareness of the spatial tensions within an image enabled them to construct confident scenarios of angular coincidence within a confined space. They were masters of intuitive calculations in non-collision theory. Unfortunately for the students, there were unusual side effects, perspective convergence addiction being one. I found myself succumbing to anxious and obsessive thoughts as the view from my cab constructed foregrounds littered with signs and portents that might seduce me towards a treacherous horizon. The imminent closure emphasised by these signs and warnings merely inflamed my desire even more to reach out and speed headlong towards the oblivion offered by these vanishing points. Having a high level of expertise in perspective mechanics became an uneasy burden of continuous calculation involving flattened grids and pin-sharp vanishing points as I rode the orthogonal flow to each destination. Put the gear stick into neutral and take your foot off the accelerator to let the engine slow down. Then engage the next gear up. Put the gear stick into neutral. Keep your foot on the accelerator and rev the engine to accommodate the next gear down. My H-pattern drawings were perfect. By the time I'd moved to Holderness, I could feel the sirens calling. Not out to sea, but inwards along the roads, inviting not a crash against the cliffs, but a crashing drop. A seduction towards the vanishing point made real, from which nothing escapes. At this point, I became obsessed by the idea of the terminus as a perfect endpoint. Not a point to turn around and return from, but the perfect journey, A to B. The 130 and the 129 routes between Bridlington and Withensea are littered with roads that veer away from the B1242 and simply end, dead ends, abrupt and uncompromising, and shortening by several metres each year. The bus company, rightly in terms of health and safety and a duty of care to its customers, would insist on swingers being in place on these routes, where the bus would perform a U-turn some distance from the end of the road. Each time I found it harder and harder to perform this manoeuvre. The not-so-ivory tower in the sea, diminishing distances between the horizontal lines of the ground plane grid lead to the marker, a vertical line, establishing a point between fore, middle and background. Skimming the line of the horizon, it completes the contiguity of horizontal and vertical. I have become a journeyman, searching for the perfect composition, a view from the windscreen that conjures the perfect perspective window on the world. To ride the orthogonals to their intersection with the horizon, to find the perfect terminus. This is the ultimate goal of the Bauhaus-trained passenger transport operative. Point, line and plane. Eventually, driving teaches you to push, to infiltrate the perspective of the bus in front. We steal its time, and in that thievery, we inflict our work upon it. My running board says 11:02. I'm here 10:58. He's here 11 o'clock. I'm too early. I slip into the lane behind him. Sights converge. I push and push. He works and works. He loses time. I make time. Now, I can only accept that the horizon line slowly, but speedily in geological terms, races towards me as much as I race towards it. Conditioned by the customised speedometers, I desperately attempt to slow my journey downward so that I approach the horizon at the same speed that it approaches me. I have a craving for this perspective experience and for end-of-the-line absolution. The Canutists hold no comfort for me. Holed up in their cliff-top shack, no pentacles for them. The chants and invocations of the neap or springtide are their litany. Riding the crest of the cliff-top, close to the wind, close to the edge, a folly teetering on the brink, brave but foolhardy. There is no second law of thermodynamics in their esoterics. Entropy reversal is a state of mind which their king himself refuted. Yet they carry on, in his name, a bastardized distortion of the quasi-historical. Their piratical stance holds no water. In my head, I'm constructing planar grids with deep space foreshortening, precise diagrams beyond the picture plane inviting the headlong rush of the horizon towards me, whilst in the minds of the Canutists, their scheming heads are filled with concrete groins, offshore defences and engineered supports and stabilisers. There is, however, one that I admire. The maverick flyer, with his ever-shortening landing strip, his Achilles heel. Otherwise, he is free of the Cartesian limitations of X and Y. He has Z to contend with. The only way to escape the horizon is to construct innumerable ground planes, not grounded in the earth, but floating, tilting and rotating in mid-air, a viewpoint no longer locked to the horizontal. The concrete cow, anchored to the sod, its resolute dumbness is there to remind him that his escape is time limited. For many years I've driven these roads. Since I left Rooney, in fact, I know this landscape intimately. The characters, the buildings, the roads, the fields, the villages, the towns, the sea, and the termini. I have plenty of time to think whilst driving these roads. This landscape somehow encourages one to reminisce. As I drive, I muse on the quest that I've embarked upon, and I imagine that final terminus. I also think back to my earlier times in this landscape. The time that I spent with my grandfather as he painted this sea, these horizons, and these dead ends. I have a recurring dream these days of a latter-day Gemelden leaping from the southbound 130 from Bridlington to Hornsey, somewhere between Barmston and Oldrome, across to the northbound 130 back to Bridlington again. He is, of course, fiddle in hand, but now he launches into some dark, traditional murder ballad where cliff edges or drowning conspire. An allusion, perhaps, to my own preoccupations.
And she didn't care how much it ate. Rifle I diddle I G-O. There she stabbed him right through the heart, down by the greenwood side, oh.
There is a pictorial perfection in the convergence towards the horizon that is lost at the moment of arrival, as if a facade has been lifted to one side to reveal the crumbling sour edge of reality. Here we find reality taking a bite out of itself, gnawing away at a vestigial piece of tissue. At one time this would sicken me, but now it sends a shudder of delight down my spine. Now, for me, the second law of thermodynamics is the glorious downhill ride to entropy. In the house I live in, I make no futile attempts to deter the ravages of time. Panta rei. Here is the terrible and frightening power to produce a new horizon line, the erosion of one vanishing point in favour of another. The twinned yellow lines on a foul subterranean descent, an abomination of their previous existence as friendly, secure, familiar guardians of the orthogonal principle, now trashed and diverted from the true horizontal to some lower plane and angled monstrosity. My descent into the perversions of perspective knows no depths. I am an addict. One day, when the spring tide calls, when the tide table and timetable converge, I shall take my bus, the 1:30, to one of these glorious termini, running private, with no passengers or oculist witnesses to question my viewpoint. I shall sit and patiently wait for the true operation of the vanishing point, to ride the slow descent below the horizon line, to disappear as the weight of the bus exacts its physical due. I am waiting for the forces to align. I am waiting for all points to converge. I am waiting. I am waiting with weight. I have perspective.